Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. This week, the map of Europe has been redrawn. On Tuesday, Vladimir Putin annexed the Ukrainian province of Crimea. The president of Russia effectively stole a chunk of another country and made it part of Mother Russia. Then today, Russian troops stormed Ukraine's naval headquarters in Crimea. War is on. Territory has been invaded. And territorial violations just like this are what led to World War I and World War II. So now that it's obvious to the world that Russia has used its military to steal another country's sovereign territory, everyone wants to know, how will the United States respond? Well, this week, Washington's reaction has been embarrassingly weak. It passed sanctions, limited sanctions, very limited sanctions. The sanctions don't freeze the assets of Russia or of members of the Russian government. They affect just 11 Russian officials, plus a handful of other people. One analyst said the sanctions are so slight that pinprick overstates their impact. Russia responded to these sanctions by openly mocking President Barack Obama. The Russian deputy prime minister tweeted that some prankster must have devised them. Here's the headline from ABC earlier this week. Russian deputy PM laughs at Obama's sanctions. This isn't quite the way Americans hoped things would turn out back in 2008. Back then, many people thought a new administration in the White House would win so much favor from major world powers that we would enter a golden era of international relations. But here we are in 2014. And the United States is being ridiculed and laughed at all over the world, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and of course, throughout every hall of power in Moscow. Notice what President Putin said on Monday about America. This was translated by Reuters. He said, "Our Western partners, headed by the United States, prefer not to be guided by international law in their practical policies, but by the rule of the gun." He then said, "They have come to believe in their exceptionalism and their sense of being the chosen ones, that they can decide destinies of the world, that it is only them who can be right." Now, it's interesting that he talked about exceptionalism. When President Obama was in France back in 2009, he was asked if he believed in American exceptionalism, and he said that he did, but it was just like the Brits, who believe in British exceptionalism, and the Greeks, who believe in Greek exceptionalism. America, in other words, is no different than any other nation. So even when Russia takes over part of another country using the rule of the gun, is it really surprising that America has yet to do anything of significance? Vladimir Putin is blatantly disregarding all kinds of international laws so that he can revive the Soviet empire. And the response out of Washington seems to be, who are we to judge? Let's go back to that ABC report about Russia laughing at President Obama's sanctions. This is toward the end of the piece. It says, U.S. officials said that among the sanctioned individuals were the key ideologists and architects of Russia's Ukraine policy, while adding that some of the Russian officials were included in the list for their role in curbing human rights and liberties in Russia. Now, that human rights statement is largely referring to homosexuals. So Russia has literally invaded and taken over part of Ukraine. Putin is literally redrawing Europe's map. Washington has responded with the world's tiniest sanctions, and even a big part of that pinprick was motivated by the homosexual agenda. Even with the insight Bible prophecy provides, it's still shocking to see how far America has fallen. Meanwhile, it's obvious that Russia is not going to stop with Crimea. Stratfor noted yesterday that Moscow can now look for leverage in other places. From this increased position of power, the Russians can strengthen its relationship with Iran, for instance, or it can begin absorbing other breakaway territories in Moldova and Georgia. there is the potential for a significant escalation between Russia and the West to go far beyond Ukraine, Stratfor wrote. Now, if you were Germany, what would you be doing right now? You fought a bitter, bitter world war against Russia. Just 70 years ago, it became a massive empire, and it split your country in half to keep you from starting another war. You've spent decades acknowledging your guilt for what you did under Hitler, and now you have a world-class economy, but you don't have the foreign policy or the military to match it. And this week, you're watching Russian troops take over part of Europe. As Spiegel Online said earlier this week, Germany has said it wants to take on greater responsibility in foreign policy, and the Crimea crisis offers a golden opportunity to do so. The world is looking for someone to step up against Putin's Russia. And as we've repeatedly said here at thetrumpet.com, Germany will rise to the occasion. Now, Europe's current organization is hampered by red tape and sovereignty and actually democracy. All this makes taking action very difficult. And the Ukraine crisis has fully exposed the glaring weakness of the European Union. Germany and Europe, though, will soon decide that getting rid of some of the sovereignty and democracy will be well worth it if it helps Europe unite so it can stand up against Russia and start projecting power everywhere in the world. We're now living in the post-American world. Russia is on the warpath, and Europe is reacting.
The Philadelphia Church of God presents The Trumpet Daily.
"100 years on from World War I, the situation between Russia, Europe, and the West looks remarkably familiar, except for one critical area. America today is on the way down and out. I want to refer you to the Post-American World issue that we produced just a few months ago. This is January 2014, and given what's happening in Ukraine and in Europe and in Russia, it was fascinating just to look back at this afternoon and to see just how spot on that issue of the Trumpet magazine was. That's January 2014. I want to take you back just a couple of decades, not long after the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the time, Ukraine had one of the most advanced nuclear arsenals in the world. It had the third largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the world. But all that changed in 1994 when a U.S.-led coalition convinced Ukraine to give up all of its nuclear weapons, all of those nuclear bombs, in exchange for an assurance that Ukraine's territorial integrity would be protected by this group, as I say, led by the United States. Now, that agreement was called the Budapest Memorandum. And I just want to read to you what Article 1 of that agreement says. The United States of America and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland reaffirm their commitment to Ukraine to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. Now, those existing borders included Crimea. The leaders of Ukraine agreed to it. They surrendered all of their nukes and said they'd rely on Washington and London to defend their borders. And now that Russia, 20 years later, has annexed Crimea, many Ukrainians are left to wonder, where is the protection the United States promised? Where is all of that protection? One of our trumpet writers, Jeremiah Jacques, recently interviewed online one of the protesters that was over there in Kiev protesting just a couple of months ago. His name, I probably will pronounce this wrong, but it's Taras Revunets, from what I can see. And he was talking to Mr. Jacques, our trumpet writer, just about this 1994 agreement where Ukraine agreed to give up all of its nukes. Firstly, he said, here, we should have kept some of those nukes as a deterrent. Now, I mean, hindsight is 20/20, as they say. And now there's probably quite a few officials in Kiev that wish they had held on to those weapons, just as a deterrent. Just going back to this interview, notice what he said to our trumpet writer. It says, being disarmed and disowned just doesn't feel right. If the U.S. fails to guarantee Ukraine's security, it will send a strong cautionary tale message to countries like Iran and North Korea. They'll know for sure that any nukes for security deals they make with the West will not be honored. As Churchill put it, you were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war. And then he went on to say that I hope I'm wrong in this. He says that war is coming, and he hopes he's wrong. But of course, as many Bible prophecies point out, he's not wrong. More war is coming. It's not going to stop in Crimea. More is coming, and it's coming on a much larger scale than even this Kiev resident understands. We'll be right back.
Russia's invasion into Crimea is causing dramatic international uproar. This incursion into the once Soviet nation is a barbaric attack that is being used to display Russia's resurgent power. Western nations are demanding that Vladimir Putin cease from sending troops into the Ukrainian state, but to no avail. Yet, as the Western world condemns Putin for his savage behavior in Crimea, one nation is pledging their support: China. China has voiced its endorsement of Russia's actions in Crimea. These two nations have a history of forming alliances, and when they do, the world would be wise to take notice. A coalition of Asian countries is prophesied to occur during the end time. The Bible says this mighty power will amass an army of 200 million men. Nowhere else on earth is there a group of nations capable of even creating such an army. We are now witnessing the ascension of this incredible block of nations. Many fail to take notice, and yet Bible prophecy is being fulfilled right before our eyes. The Bible forecasted that the newscasters of today would be like sleeping dogs, failing to bark when a threat is on their doorstep. Though the outcome of these events looks bleak, it is actually leading to the greatest event ever to occur in the history of man. These painful prophecies all conclude with the inspiring return of Jesus Christ. To learn more about the fulfillment of Bible prophecy in Asia and its incredible outcome, watch Gerald Fleury's recent Key of David program, Russia and China Unite.
Last week, we referred you to an article by Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, written just a couple of weeks ago in response to Putin's push into Ukraine, and he followed that up with yet another article just a week later. This is from theamericaninterest.com, printed on March the 12th, titled "It Takes Three to Tango." Notice what Gutenberg has to say here. But whereas Russia has acted aggressively and pointedly, Europe now struggles to get its footing. This is tragic, as Europe has a historic responsibility to get this crisis right. It says the EU has more leverage over the situation than many policymakers seem to think that they do. So, I mean, he's calling for action. And a few other strong voices in Europe are doing the same, and these calls for action are surely going to escalate as Vladimir Putin continues with this aggressive belligerence. He's calling for more action, and as I noted there at the top in the monologue, since America is no longer willing to step up, what we see is a lot of nations and leaders in this world scrambling to fill that power vacuum. This continues from Gutenberg's article. It says the European Union lacks established mechanisms to deal with situations like the near outbreak of a war on its borders. Instead, it is largely up to the ability of its political leaders of the day if the EU is to be capable of doing anything beyond issuing stern reprimands. It says, with the European elections in May, we might see an even greater than usual leadership vacuum in the EU as the whole bureaucracy prepares for a changing of the guard. So it doesn't look good in the immediate future, he's noting. But notice how it concludes. The seemingly endless carpet dealer rounds for EU and NATO leadership positions must not become too big of a distraction among the potential top candidates, who also tend to be the most important figures involved in handling the Ukraine crisis. Here again, Chancellor Angela Merkel's influence and Germany's strategy are going to be key factors. Germany, in other words, needs to step up. Merkel needs to take the lead. Many voices, as we've noted before in previous programs, are calling on Germany to take the lead here, including the United States, believe it or not. Let's look at Matthew 24, a few scriptures from the Gospels. These are words from Jesus Christ, and it's important to try to wrap our minds around these many prophecies that are being fulfilled. I mean, we're leaving behind the comfortable era where the West was dominated by Britain first and now the United States, and with the United States leaving the scene. Who's going to step in? Already you see movement in Asia and elsewhere from nations that aren't so friendly toward the United States. And in Matthew 24 here in verse 3, I'll just read a clip from it from the Revised Standard Version. It says, what will be the sign of, this is the disciples asking Christ, what will be the sign of your coming and the close of this age? That's the disciples of Christ, Christians, asking Jesus Christ, what will be the sign of the end of this age? Now look over at the parallel account in the book of Luke. This is Luke chapter 21. There's 4 Gospels, as you know, and they're all history of that first century ministry of Jesus Christ. Luke 21 can be compared with Matthew 24 and then also Mark 13 if you want to go and study these chapters together. We'll look at verse 36 here, Luke 21 and verse 36. It says, watch you therefore and pray always that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. Watch, God says. Watch, Jesus Christ said. Now, a third of the world purports to be Christian. And yet when you read through Luke 21, you read through Matthew 24, there's a lot of things in there, a lot of statements from Jesus Christ himself that many so-called Christians today just simply don't believe. Back up to verse 24. This is Luke 21 and verse 24. It says, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So who are the Gentiles? And if we want to follow what Jesus Christ is saying here, we've got to watch for these developments, the times of the Gentiles, as the Bible talks about. Now here again, I can't go into all these details here in just one program, but that is discussed in this January issue. Now, we've since had a few issues that have come out since this one, but go to thetrumpet.com and you can download the entire issue, the entire PDF, and print it on your printer and read what we were saying several months ago, because much of it's coming to pass, so much of it. What we were talking about just a few months ago, Jesus Christ prophesied that we would enter into a time when America's and Britain's global influence would be essentially snuffed out. And that's what we're entering into. And we'd be superseded by these Gentile powers rising. Here again, you need to go and study this issue to understand who these Gentile nations are. But in this verse we just read there, Jerusalem is referred to as being trodden down by the Gentiles. You can compare that with Revelation 11, verses 1 and 2 there as well, which speak about the same things. this period going on for 3.5 years, and we know that the city of Jerusalem itself over there in the Middle East, that they're going to be surrounded by armies and such, but prophetically speaking, Jerusalem is also a symbol of the end-time nations of Israel, which would include not just those people of Judah, but primarily actually Ephraim and Manasseh in prophecy, which is the peoples of the United States and Britain today. And all those nations that used to be part of the British Commonwealth, or still are, it refers to those people primarily. And so Bible prophecy tells us to be prepared for this seismic shift in momentum away from a Western-dominated world that was dominated for more than 2 centuries by the British Empire and then the United States of America. And now we see, as Mr. Armstrong wrote in the United States and Britain in Prophecy, the sun has set on the British Empire. And then look at how fast the United States is falling. Now all of this seismic shift, as I say, all of this brutality and bloodshed, this warfare, this world war, in fact, you can go back to Matthew 24 and see where Jesus talks about great tribulation in this end time that's unlike anything this world has seen. And we've seen a lot of horrific war in man's history, but the worst is yet to come. Now the good news is it's going to clear the way for Jesus Christ's return to this earth. Now here again, I want you to go back and get the January issue of the Trumpet magazine. In this issue, we go through quite a few articles. Here's one, Conquering the Holy Land. We talk about how the Middle East is about to be reshaped because of America's departure. Look at what happened last year in Syria. Who came in there to solve it, quote unquote, to solve the problem? Of course, the problem isn't solved. It's ongoing. 150,000 people have been slaughtered there now. The civil war continues. It's as brutal as ever. And people are focused on other things. Same with Libya and all these other unstable regions, Egypt. Well, we talk in this issue about that region being reshaped. Also, we talk about Europe, post-American Europe, and as it says there, the world's next superpower. In addition, and this is important too, with respect to Putin and Russia, and of course China. My father's been talking about this alliance just last week on the Key of David, as you saw there in that promo. He's been talking about these kings in the East and how the Asian landscape is going to be transformed because of all that we see happening with America's demise. Let me just give you one quote from this January 2014 issue. It says, "But what darkness! Soon we will look back upon the problems making headlines today and recognize that they were merely, as Jesus Christ termed it, the beginning of sorrows." It says, "The time for complacency is past. The times of the Gentiles are upon us." They are here. That's what we were saying in this issue. And so I want you to make sure, besides this issue, make sure you become a subscriber. This comes out every month. We'll send it to your mailbox, free of charge, no cost, no obligation to you, for a weekly update on all the news stories that are the most important from a prophetic standpoint. Make sure that you also log on to the Trumpet and sign up for the Trumpet Weekly, which we'll email to you at the end of each week. So if you don't have this literature, make sure that you go to thetrumpet.com to get it, or as you see there on your screen, you can call the 800 number and an operator will take care of it today. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the Trumpet Daily.